Have you ever wondered if life is just one giant hamster wheel where we're all running nowhere fast? What if I told you there's an ancient book that tackles this exact existential crisis head-on, written by someone who literally had everything money could buy, every pleasure imaginable, and unlimited power, yet still felt completely empty inside? Today we're diving deep into one of the most brutally honest and surprisingly modern books in the entire Bible, Ecclesiastes, and trust me, this isn't your typical Sunday school lesson. Picture this. You're the richest person alive. You've built incredible monuments. You have 1,000 wives. You throw parties that make modern billionaires look broke. And yet you wake up every morning thinking life is meaningless. That was King Solomon, and his journey through what we might call an ancient midlife crisis became one of the most profound philosophical works ever written. But here's where it gets really interesting. Ecclesiastes doesn't sugarcoat anything. This isn't feel-good spirituality or positive thinking. It's raw, it's real, and it asks the questions we're all secretly thinking but afraid to voice. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why does everyone die regardless of how they live? What's the point of working so hard if someone else will just inherit everything you've built? The Hebrew title of this book is Koheleth, which means the gatherer or the preacher. But Solomon presents himself as someone who has gathered all possible human experiences and is about to share his findings. And spoiler alert, his initial conclusion might shock you. The book opens with what might be the most famous verse in Ecclesiastes. Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. Now before you think this is just ancient pessimism, the Hebrew word here is hebel, which literally means vapor or breath. Picture breathing on a cold morning. You see that little puff of air, and then it's gone. That's what Solomon is saying about life initially. It's here for a moment, then vanishes. But here's what makes Ecclesiastes absolutely fascinating. It's not a linear journey from despair to hope. It's more like an emotional roller coaster where Solomon takes us through his systematic search for meaning. He's like the ultimate life hacker, trying every possible avenue to find fulfillment. And he documents everything with scientific precision. First, he tries wisdom and knowledge. As the wisest man who ever lived, you'd think this would satisfy him, right? Wrong. He discovers that with much wisdom comes much sorrow, and whoever increases knowledge increases grief. Think about it. The more you understand about injustice, suffering, and the complexities of life, the heavier the burden becomes. Ignorance really can be bliss sometimes. Then Solomon pivots to pleasure and entertainment. He throws himself into every conceivable form of enjoyment: wine, music, comedy, luxury. If it felt good, he tried it. Modern research on hedonic adaptation actually confirms what Solomon discovered thousands of years ago. Pleasure gives temporary highs, but you always return to baseline, and you need more and more stimulation to achieve the same satisfaction. Next up, achievement and work. Solomon undertakes massive construction projects, builds gardens and parks, creates water systems, accumulates servants and possessions. He becomes what we might call today a serial entrepreneur or empire builder. But even at the peak of success, he realizes that all his accomplishments will eventually crumble or be inherited by someone who might destroy everything he built in a single generation. This leads to one of the most psychologically sophisticated observations in ancient literature. Solomon grapples with what modern psychology calls mortality salience, the awareness that death makes everything temporary. He observes that both the wise and the foolish, the righteous and the wicked, all end up in the same place. Death is the great equalizer that renders all human distinctions meaningless. But wait, here's where Ecclesiastes gets really clever. Just when you think Solomon is spiraling into complete nihilism, he starts introducing what philosophers call existential anchors, small moments and perspectives that provide stability in an otherwise chaotic universe. He talks about timing and seasons. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. This isn't just poetic language, it's profound wisdom about accepting the rhythms of life rather than fighting against them. There's a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to mourn and a time to dance. The key insight is that meaning comes not from controlling these seasons, but from recognizing which season you're in and responding appropriately. Solomon also discovers something revolutionary about work and achievement. The problem isn't work itself, but our motivations and expectations. When we work to prove our worth, chase endless growth, or try to build permanent legacies, we set ourselves up for disappointment. But when we work as a form of contribution and find satisfaction in the process rather than just the outcomes, work becomes meaningful. One of the most counterintuitive insights in Ecclesiastes is about wealth and possessions. Solomon had more money than almost anyone in history, yet he concludes that money amplifies whatever is already in your heart. If you're empty inside, wealth makes that emptiness more pronounced. If you're anxious, wealth gives you more things to worry about losing. If you're already content, money can enhance that contentment, but it can never create contentment from scratch. The book also tackles one of humanity's biggest frustrations, the apparent randomness of life. Solomon observes that the race doesn't always go to the swift, the battle doesn't always go to the strong, and bread doesn't always go to the wise. Sometimes good people suffer while evil people prosper. This seems to contradict everything we want to believe about cosmic justice. But rather than dismissing this as meaningless, Solomon suggests a different framework. Maybe the unpredictability of life is actually a feature, not a bug. Maybe the inability to control outcomes forces us to focus on things we actually can control: our character, our relationships, our responses to circumstances. This brings us to what might be the most practical wisdom in Ecclesiastes, the concept of eating, drinking, and finding satisfaction in work as gifts from God. This isn't hedonism or escapism. It's recognizing that simple pleasures and daily activities contain profound meaning when we approach them with the right perspective. Think about it. When was the last time you really tasted your food instead of rushing through a meal? When did you last have a conversation where you were fully present instead of thinking about your next task? Solomon suggests that meaning isn't found in grand achievements, but in fully experiencing the ordinary moments that make up most of life. The relational dimension of Ecclesiastes is equally powerful. Solomon talks about how two are better than one and describes the strength that comes from companionship. In a world that often celebrates individual achievement, this ancient wisdom points to relationships as one of the primary sources of meaning and resilience. But perhaps the most sophisticated insight in Ecclesiastes is about time and eternity. Solomon says that God has set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. We have this built-in sense that there should be more to life than what we can see, but we can't fully grasp the bigger picture. This creates what we might call existential tension. We long for meaning and permanence while living in a world that appears temporary and chaotic. Rather than resolving this tension, Solomon suggests learning to live creatively within it. The tension itself might be part of what makes us human. As the book progresses, Solomon's perspective shifts from despair to a more nuanced understanding. He begins to see life as a gift rather than a burden, work as contribution rather than futility, and relationships as sources of strength rather than complications. The famous passage about time and seasons isn't just about accepting change. It's about finding rhythm and wisdom in the natural cycles of life. There's beauty in the fact that nothing lasts forever, including pain and suffering. The temporary nature of life that initially seemed like a curse begins to look more like mercy. Solomon also grapples with the question of legacy and impact. Since we can't control what happens after we die, how do we find meaning in our limited time? His answer is surprisingly modern. Focus on the process rather than the outcome, contribute to something larger than yourself, and invest in relationships that will outlast your physical presence. One of the most psychologically astute observations in Ecclesiastes is about comparison and competition. Solomon notes how much human misery comes from envying others and trying to keep up with neighbors. This ancient wisdom anticipates modern research on social comparison theory and the hedonic treadmill. The book also addresses what we might call analysis paralysis, the tendency to overthink everything rather than taking action. Solomon warns against being over-righteous or over-wise, suggesting that perfectionism and excessive analysis can be just as destructive as recklessness. As we move toward the conclusion of Ecclesiastes, Solomon's tone becomes more instructive and hopeful. He's not just sharing his existential struggles anymore. He's offering practical wisdom for living well in an uncertain world. He talks about the importance of reputation and character, suggesting that a good name is better than fine perfume. This isn't about image management or people-pleasing, but about building authentic integrity that provides stability regardless of external circumstances. The book also contains surprisingly sophisticated advice about emotional regulation and perspective-taking. Solomon suggests that anger and frustration often come from unrealistic expectations about how the world should work, and peace comes from accepting reality while still working to improve what we can. One of the most powerful themes in the later chapters is about generosity and risk-taking. Solomon uses the metaphor of casting bread upon waters, suggesting that meaningful action often requires faith in uncertain outcomes. This ancient wisdom anticipates modern research on the psychological benefits of giving and contributing to others. The agricultural metaphors throughout Ecclesiastes are particularly rich. Solomon talks about planting seeds without knowing which will grow, preparing for both rain and drought, and working diligently while accepting that ultimate outcomes are beyond our control. This isn't passive resignation, but active engagement with an attitude of humble confidence. As the book builds toward its climax, Solomon introduces what might be the most important concept in all of Ecclesiastes: the fear of the Lord. This isn't terror or anxiety, but a profound recognition of our place in a larger cosmic order. It's the wisdom that comes from understanding our limitations while still choosing to live with purpose and meaning. The famous concluding passage brings everything together in a powerful synthesis. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, Solomon says, using poetic language to describe the aging process and the approach of death. But this isn't morbid, it's motivational. The awareness of life's brevity becomes a catalyst for living more intentionally. The final verdict of Ecclesiastes might surprise you. After all the questioning, struggling, and searching, Solomon concludes, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." This isn't a retreat into religious platitudes, but a sophisticated understanding of how meaning emerges from proper relationship with transcendence. But here's what makes this conclusion so powerful. It doesn't negate everything that came before. The questions remain valid, the struggles are real, and the search for meaning continues. But now there's a framework for holding it all together. The genius of Ecclesiastes is that it doesn't offer easy answers or false comfort. Instead, it provides a mature perspective on how to live meaningfully in a complex world. It acknowledges the absurdity and frustration of human existence while pointing towards sources of genuine satisfaction and purpose. What makes this ancient book so relevant today is that our modern world has essentially run the same experiments Solomon did. We've pursued technological solutions to human problems, accumulated unprecedented wealth and comfort, and gained access to infinite entertainment and information. Yet anxiety, depression, and existential emptiness seem more common than ever. Ecclesiastes suggests that this isn't a bug in the human system, it's a feature. The restlessness and longing we feel aren't problems to be solved, but invitations to seek meaning in the right places. The temporary nature of life isn't a cosmic mistake, but a design that encourages us to invest in what truly matters. The book also offers a sophisticated understanding of wisdom itself. Solomon distinguishes between technical knowledge and practical wisdom, between being clever and being wise. True wisdom involves knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to hold on and when to let go. Perhaps most importantly, Ecclesiastes provides a framework for living with uncertainty and complexity without becoming cynical or despairing. It's possible to acknowledge life's difficulties while still choosing hope, to recognize our limitations while still pursuing meaningful goals, to accept mortality while still investing in the future. The emotional journey of Ecclesiastes mirrors what many people experience in their own lives. The initial enthusiasm and optimism of youth often gives way to disillusionment and questioning in midlife, which can then mature into a more grounded and sustainable form of wisdom and purpose. This isn't a linear progression from ignorance to knowledge, but a cyclical process of questioning, exploring, struggling, and finding new levels of understanding. The questions don't disappear, but our capacity to live creatively with them increases. The book's honest acknowledgement of life's contradictions and complexities makes it surprisingly comforting. When you're struggling with meaning and purpose, it's reassuring to know that even the wisest person in history went through the same struggles and came out with a perspective that has provided guidance for thousands of years. Ecclesiastes ultimately suggests that meaning isn't something we discover like a hidden treasure, but something we create through our choices, relationships, and responses to circumstances. The meaning isn't inherent in external events, but emerges from our engagement with life itself. This ancient wisdom anticipates many insights from modern psychology and philosophy, while maintaining a transcendent perspective that purely secular approaches often lack. It's neither naive optimism nor cynical pessimism, but mature realism that encompasses both suffering and joy, both limitation and possibility. As we conclude our journey through Ecclesiastes, the lasting impression isn't one of answers, but of accompaniment. Solomon doesn't solve the human condition, but provides companionship for the journey. He shows us that the search for meaning is itself meaningful, that the questions are as important as the answers, and that wisdom often comes not from having everything figured out, but from learning to live well with uncertainty. The book leaves us with practical tools for navigating life's complexities while maintaining hope and purpose. It suggests that meaning is found not in avoiding life's difficulties, but in engaging them with wisdom, courage, and faith. And perhaps, most importantly, it reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles. Even the wisest people in history have walked this same path and found reasons to keep going. Whether you're in a season of questioning, searching, struggling, or growing, Ecclesiastes offers both challenge and comfort, both honest acknowledgement of life's difficulties and genuine hope for finding meaning and purpose in the midst of it all.